If you are traveling to explore nature, you probably would like to be eco-friendly. In this video, I will briefly highlight how tourism can negatively impact the environment, using the stunningly beautiful Halong Bay, Vietnam as an example. Then I will give you 10 tips on how to be as eco-friendly as you can while traveling, coming up right after this. This is Halong Bay, the most beautiful place I have ever been to in the world. Located in northern Vietnam, the UNESCO World Heritage Site is famous for its spectacular karst landscape with over 1,600 islands and islets with exotic steep cliffs, many of which rise 100 to 200 meters above sea level. The place is home to hundreds of people who live in floating fishing communities and is recognized for its unique biodiversity and cultural significance. For these reasons, Halong Bay has become a prominent tourism hotspot. While tourism in Halong Bay has brought in lots of money, there has been major concern about the environmental impacts of growth of tourism on Halong Bay. There has been an increase of legal and illegal fishing, commercial boat traffic, and pollution. For example, there is relatively little flat land in the bay that can be developed because of the steep terrain of the karst islands. To make room for the increasing number of tourists, developers have made artificial land by dredging the bay and dumping the sediment onto the shoreline. This has destroyed mangroves, corals, and other organisms in this tropical ecosystem. Tourists have dined at hundreds of floating restaurants in the bay, which dump their waste directly into the water, causing more negative effects. Many of these restaurants also use styrofoam to float, and chunks can break off, polluting the environment even more. When I was visiting Vietnam, I had the privilege to speak with Long Hong Pham about the environmental impacts of tourism in Halong Bay. Long is a professor at Vietnam National University and has been studying tourism in Vietnam for a very long time.
I was born and raised up in Halong Bay, and I know that when I was a child, Halong Bay water is very clean. But nowadays, since they build up a lot of big hotel and a lot of tourists coming, so you see a lot of waste, rubbish, pollution in Halong Bay. Tourism bring many negative impact to Halong Bay in terms of environmental. Tourism may bring a lot profit to Vietnam. So in terms of economic, tourism bring a lot of jobs for Vietnamese people. Tourism may bring also very good impact, but also very negative impact. It's like a fire. It can, you know that fire can cook a meal, but it can burn a house.
Right.
Tourism is like that.
Long also explained that tourism can result in negative social impacts as well. When tourism develops, prices can rise to a point that local people cannot afford. This can result in more crime and illegal underground activity involving things like drugs and prostitution. So what has been done to minimize the negative environmental impacts of tourism in Halong Bay? Well, fortunately, the government has stepped in and created regulations.
As a World Heritage Site, everyone has responsible for preserve the World Heritage Site.
Right.
Because whenever they lifted into the World Heritage Site, they have to follow some standard, some criteria of UNESCO. So even tourists have to follow those criteria and those standards for making the World Heritage Site become sustainable.
The truth is, larger environmental problems can only be solved in a top-down approach in which the government steps in and implements regulations. But what can you do on an individual level to minimize your impact on the environment as a tourist? Now we are getting into the second part of the video, in which I will give you 10 tips how to minimize your environmental impact as a tourist. Tip number 1 is be respectful of the land you visit. Of course, you should always respect the land, whether you are visiting a place or just at home. But for example, if you are hiking, stay on the path so you do not trample the native habitat for the local wildlife. And obviously, do not litter. The next tip is recycle and reuse. Instead of buying a plastic water bottle that could end up inside a sea creature's stomach, use and refill a reusable water bottle. And of course, again, you should do this anywhere, even at home. And also bring your own bags if you're going to go souvenir shopping. The next tip is use alternatives to driving and flying. For example, do walking tours, biking tours, share rides, take public transportation. Instead of flying across the country, take a bus, that is, if you can, or if you are not short on time. Seeing the countryside is also a really good way to travel anyway. The next tip is purchase carbon offset credits. There are programs online that allow you to spend money on planting trees somewhere else in the world that will offset carbon that is emitted into the atmosphere that is calculated from the distance that you travel. Obviously, this costs money, so you can only do this if you can afford it. But if you can't afford it, definitely something to consider. The next tip is to try to support local businesses and not large corporations. Eating at a local restaurant, for example, is going to be way better at supporting local people than eating at an international chain. If you are going on a wildlife tour, try to hire a local guide, someone who is not working for a company that imports its own guides from other countries. Supporting local people is especially important in developing countries. The next tip is to be cautious of what souvenirs you buy. If you are buying souvenirs, try to do your best on knowing exactly what you are buying. Understandably, this can be really tough to do, but one thing that can help you is if you are buying a handmade craft, for example, trying to buy it at a place where it is being made right in front of you is the best way to do it. That way you know that it is not being made in unethical conditions. Also, do not buy any animal products just to be safe, whether it is some type of feather decoration or a bowl made from a turtle shell. If you are not entirely sure which animal products to avoid, just avoid them altogether. The next tip is to not support cruel animal tourist attractions. There are many animal tourist attractions that involve up-close involvement with animals that actually really are harmful to animals. For example, petting tigers or riding elephants are examples of cruel animal attractions. These animals have usually been abused repeatedly, so they are submissive around humans. So just stay away from these types of attractions. The next tip is do not stay in all-inclusive resorts or cruises. This is not always true, but generally, these types of accommodations are pretty wasteful. They pollute a lot, and they're just not really efficient environmentally. Again, just because a place is all-inclusive does not mean that it is not environmentally friendly, but it just so happens to be the case, from my background knowledge, that they are generally not that environmentally friendly. My next tip is to book tours in accommodation that advertise as environmentally friendly. There are many tours in lodges that advertise themselves as being eco-friendly, and sometimes there are certifications that validate their eco-friendly practices. You need to do your research though to know if there are actually valid qualifications, which leads me to my next tip, which is to do your research ahead of time on everything. Whether it is researching an eco-lodge that advertises themselves as being eco-friendly or researching the cruel animal tourist attractions to avoid, there is a plethora of information out there on the internet to research. The challenge is sifting through the information so that you get an accurate review of a tour or accommodation. Some websites will have reviews which you can read from other people so you can help determine whether a place is environmentally friendly or not. Just be worried that websites like TripAdvisor may have helpful reviews for general experiences, but for finding out if a place is environmentally friendly or not, TripAdvisor is not a good website because the incentive for tourism businesses and tourists to engage on TripAdvisor is to make money, and that incentive is not to be environmentally friendly. But there are websites that do give honest, solid reviews on places with sustainable tourism. One website is called ecotourlinkq.com, which is a database of sustainable ecotourism businesses. I will post the link in the description below this video. And lastly, I will give a bonus tip. And this tip is to explore the nature and wildlife of a new place, record videos, take photos, and then post it on social media along with some wise words about environmental conservation. Some people say that social media has spread the word about places too quickly and therefore has ruined travel destinations because they have become overcrowded. I believe that this is true, but the way I view the whole thing with social media and travel is that there is nothing stopping the world from being explored unless they outlaw social media. And also, as more and more people are traveling and as it is becoming easier and cheaper to travel, we just need to do the best we can to make it so that tourism is happening in the most sustainable way possible. So, for example, it is the responsibility of many destinations around the world to regulate the tourism so that the destinations do not get too overcrowded. So I don't see anything wrong with sharing your travel experiences with other people through social media, and I think it is really a positive thing if you make it about conservation. For example, if you post a photo of a bird you took while visiting somewhere, and in the caption you post something interesting about its natural history and conservation, I think that it is overall going to make people more enthusiastic about exploring nature anywhere and living in this world in a more sustainable way overall. And that is really what the main focus of this channel is. I'm a biologist and I teach you how to enjoy nature, whether it is ecotourism, travel guides, tips on how to spot and photograph wildlife, or sharing some cool science. If you are interested, hit the subscribe button. I encourage everyone to explore nature and share their experiences, no matter where they are in the world, because just remember, exploring nature is always an adventure. Peace out.